Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sundivadi Paschatya Satarni. We are continuing speaking about the roles of male and female. This is class number 5. And we last week focused, at least part of the class, on an article by Vishaka Devi Dasi, in which she was trying to reconcile statements in Shastra and statements by Srila Prabhupada that are sometimes difficult to understand, both for men and women, or perhaps seem antiquated, impractical, or perhaps in some cases seem dangerous in the sense that they could be seen as open to abuse, putting women in a vulnerable situation. They could be seen as patriarchal, and perhaps not appropriate in modern society. So she wrote an article to further explain how we can understand these things that Prabhupada said. And as I mentioned a little bit in previous classes, that because a lot of what we learn about gender roles are coming from times which are much different than ours, sometimes these statements seem difficult for us to accept. But in most cases, it's because of the structure of society today. But I will admit that some of these statements cannot be applied within the structure of society today, because society is so much different, and we don't have the samskars or the attitudes. For example, in Vedic culture, women were married very young, but we tried that in ISKCON and it became problematic. Marrying young girls. Problematic because they weren't ready, and problematic because they were immature, especially the boys were immature. And we tried other experiments in ISKCON, which were how things were traditionally done with live-in gurukulas, and we found that always didn't work because a lot of the students needed their parents, a lot of the students didn't want to be there. So in a culture in which young Brahmin boys are raised to go to the Gurukula, it works. But in a culture where you're putting non-Brahmin boys in a school, it can be problematic. Or in a culture where that's just not the way children are raised. They're not raised. They're not raised thinking that this is what I want to do. I want to go to Gurukul. The girls aren't raised thinking, oh yes, when I'm 11, my parents will find a husband, or when I'm 8, my parents will find a husband, or when I'm 13. So, although it has redeeming benefits, and we've talked about those benefits, and we can continue to talk about those benefits, we also have to understand the liabilities within the present culture. So I think that's important. And if you look at ISKCON history, most of you weren't around in the late 70s, early 80s. But at that time, Prabhupada left, and at that time we were all young, still in our 20s, and we had to take over. And so our life experience and maturity, and the fact that we were trying to implement Vedic ideas within Western culture sometimes didn't work. And so we would cause problems or enforce situations that we shouldn't have enforced on people. It wasn't healthy. So we have that history. So that's just a caveat. Not that we deny what the Vedas say, or we try to ignore it or just write it off as impractical. But at the same time, we have experience in our movement in which some, as Prabhupada said, experiments in applying Vedic culture didn't work well. And Prabhupada called them experiments because he also wasn't sure. He called the Gurukul an experiment. Let's see let's see if this works. And in a sense, many things were experiments. Initiating devotees early on in the movement, marrying his couples who were boyfriends and girlfriends, sending people around the world. All of this were experiments. But specifically what we're talking about in terms of women was how the movement and how the leaders, the male leaders, dealt with women, and how men spoke about women, especially in class. And a lot of it was belittling, denigrating, fanatical, and not based on affection or respect. It was very demeaning, but innocently men thought that's how they become detached. And they innocently thought that that was actually our Siddhanta. So it was a misunderstanding and thus a misapplication. But a misunderstanding, and I'm trying to put this in record mode. Oh, there's no card in it. A misunderstanding and a misapplication. Yes. Misunderstanding and misapplication. And there was a lot of that in certain areas. And we have learned from that, but I can't say that it's not existing to some degree in different areas of ISKCON. And we can't say that everyone who's a younger devotee can apply Krishna consciousness in a way that mature devotees can. And in some parts of the world, you don't have a lot of older devotees. So there may be a tendency to misunderstand Shastric injunctions and application. Now, I was just thinking today, before I started this class, that in reading this article by Vishaka Devi Dasi, who's a very advanced devotee, and had a lot of association with Prabhupada, and she wrote a book about it, that some people may categorize her in a way that they would even criticize me for reading this article, which I personally feel would be unfortunate if anyone did, and borderline offensive. Of course, I don't want to call anyone offensive, and of course, no one has done this yet, but I was just thinking this morning, it's possible that I could be maligned for reading an article by someone who more conservative devotees might think to be a feminist, which I don't think is the case, or maybe they think she's pushing to be a guru, and that's not the case. And things are misunderstood. So these dynamics exist within ISKCON, and when oftentimes if you defend a more quote unquote liberal idea, which is not necessarily, I wouldn't say necessarily liberal, but seen to be liberal, in defending women's position and their rights, it's said to be kind of a compromise with modern society. Well, this is what they do in modern society, and so you want to do it in ISKCON. But I think the point is that, as we've seen, that there are things within modern society that do work well in ISKCON, and there are things within traditional Vedic culture that just don't work well in ISKCON, at least not in Western ISKCON, or countries which are westernized, because people don't have the mentality, the attitude, or the samskars, or the culture. I saw this with one devotee, and this devotee was living in Mayapur, and she wanted to be a perfectly Vedic wife, and very, she just wanted to be Vedic. She really appreciated the idea, but I didn't think she could actually do it. I didn't think by her nature it was natural for her, and I thought it would be difficult, more than difficult. I thought it would be troublesome and problematic. But she tried and tried and tried, because that was her nature. Like, if she does something, she wants to do it fully, all the way. And the more she did it, the more I would tell her, this is not your nature. And she would say, but my husband appreciates a Vedic wife. And I would say, well, you have to let him know that's not really, he didn't marry a Vedic wife. If that's what he thought, then he was mistaken, because she is very westernized. And, you know, what Western women do is not very Vedic. And she was, I could say, a typical Western woman, or maybe even a typical, more liberal. But she tried and tried and tried. And she really wanted to be Vedic. That was her goal. She really valued Vedic. And she tried and tried, and I said, I don't think you can be. I don't think you can be this very rigid, conservative, Vedic devotee and Vedic wife. You have to incorporate Krishna consciousness in a way which works for you, which is natural, which will help you. But still, she pursued it. And then eventually, one day she gave up Krishna consciousness because she was trying to do something that wasn't possible for her. It was like the all or nothing. And so it's important when you're discussing traditional roles of women and how to apply that in the modern day, that the bottom line is what works for Krishna consciousness. It's not about sticking solely to the principles, although in some cases it may be. But the higher principle, of course, is, does this work? Is this helping? Does it even work for the men? Does it make the men awkward? In some cases, traditional roles of women also make the men feel a little awkward because they feel it's unnatural for them and also seen as unnatural for the women. Although, if a woman feels natural in that role, that's wonderful. The problem is not generally women feeling natural in that role. The problem is they don't feel natural in that role. And sometimes they're minimized or made to feel guilty or shamed for being a little bit too much like a man. So, for the men, as you know, women are a bit more like men in our culture than in traditional cultures, because that's how they're raised. And they do many of the same things men do, and they think in ways like men think. And they can do it well. Now the question is whether they should do all these things. Is that socially beneficial? Is it good for them? That's another discussion. But the fact is that they want to do many things, and they think that it's good for them. And these questions don't generally come up in Western society. And so those women become devotees. And then, as we had discussed, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the men are raised in a society in which women are sexualized, objectified. And so their predominant connection or relationship with women tends to be sexual. That's the binding force for man, and strong attraction. So then you have men coming to ISKCON who are trying to be celibate, and women coming who have had, most of them have had many relationships and have been in perhaps dominant positions. And now we're trying to get the men who've had many sexual relationships, women also, we're trying to get them into more traditional roles as brahmachari, brahmacharini, and then submissive wives and so forth. And when you look at that, you can understand why, for most people, it doesn't work well. Yes, a man can be brahmachari for a year or 2, 3 or 4 if he's got good association, but most men, at a certain point, aren't able to do that, and to even think that they can do it for their entire life, in looking where they're coming from, is a mistake, and it's misleading, and we would be misleading them. To think that women can be ideal Vedic, chaste, humble, submissive, Draupadis, Devahutis, and so on. That's not realistic. Some can, just as some men can be perfect brahmacharis, and some women can be more of a Vedic ideal. And there's no indication, at least that I can see, that Prabhupada expected women to be that way. He appreciated the Vedic ideal. When women were wearing jeans and t-shirts, he appreciated when they put on saris. He told them, you should serve your husband and be submissive. But did Prabhupada expect the women to be ideal Vedic women as women were traditionally in India? Prabhupada was realistic. He knew what he was dealing with. So does that mean that we should say, well, it's okay for women just to be whatever they are, conditioned by they are in Western society? No, because a lot of that conditioning is directly going to be a problem for their Krishna consciousness. But from the male perspective, one of my godbrothers, godsisters, told me something, and it made a deep impression on me. She said there are a lot of injustices that come up in ISKCON that are perpetrated against women from men. They don't always get equal rights where they should get equal rights. Maybe in some situations they shouldn't, because men and women are not equal. Or when I say equal rights, separation obviously has to be there from men and women. But in most cases, or perhaps we could say in all cases, they should have equal rights, or wherever that doesn't create social conflict, they should have equal rights. So she told me, she said, but we don't always have that, and we're often discriminated against or put down for no reason other than the fact that we're women, and you as men, you're the ones who have to speak up. You have to say something. So when we talk about the position of women and the position of men, especially if we see as men that women are being discriminated against or put down in the class or not given service for which they're qualified because they're women and similar things, we should speak up that this is not right. In the same way, if women cross the border and they're being unchaste or disturbing the men unnecessarily, yes, we should also speak up and to the authorities or to the women say that this is appropriate behavior. So, inappropriate, excuse me. So we have these responsibilities as men. So in this discussion now, when we're speaking about the roles of women, as I said last week, it's just as important, if not more important, for the men to be aware of what their roles are and how sometimes their roles are misunderstood or these traditional roles are used against them to denigrate them, minimize their service, even shame them. Now, you don't see that so much in ISKCON, but late 70s and 80s, maybe not even late 70s, this was quite common. And it went unnoticed because it was so common. And I don't want to describe all the details of it because a lot of you don't know. But there were these accusations against us in the 70s and 80s that we were a cult. And later on in the 90s, when we had to deal with these issues, the leaders of the movement recognized, yes, in many ways we actually were a cult. We did restrict people's freedoms in certain ways, especially women. So we had to admit that. And it's a reality. And can it happen again? Sure, why not? Is it happening now in some places? Of course, it must be. We're all learning how to adapt Krishna consciousness to a modern culture and modern situations. So we should be aware of that. Now, we have to take a break for 30 seconds or so because right before class, I drank 1 liter of lemon water, which you should all do every morning. It's very healthy. But as they say, what goes up goes down, and as I say, what goes in must come out. So I have to step out to, as Prabhupada said, answer the call of nature. And I will return shortly. And to keep you all engaged, I will put this deity of Krishna on the speaker, and you can meditate on him. How's that? And I'll be right back. Okay, the moral of the story is don't drink a liter of water before you give class. So, I'm going to read something. This morning, I read something written by a devotee who had bad experiences as a woman in ISKCON, and I don't want to read that. But she listed, this was subjective, her personal, excuse me, her personal experiences. But I wanted to read something that she wrote that was nice. Perhaps some of you may have heard this, and this is from Women. Excuse me, allergy season. This is from Women, senior devotees, on their experience of Prabhupada. Women who lived in India during the early days of ISKCON told me that the founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, always made sure that his women disciples were treated well and that they felt included. He personally took care of details like making sure that they had adequate living quarters, good food, and even rides to events. When the devotees went places as a group, Srila Prabhupada invited the women to ride with him in his car to make sure they got there. He set it up so that women could stand at the front in the temples to behold the altars, darshan. He encouraged women to give Bhagavatam class and lead kirtan, and he nominated 2 women, Jamuna and Govinda Dasi, to the governing body commission, GBC. Unfortunately, an elitist and rowdy band of male disciples, headed by the late blank blank blank, turned all this around so that women were counted out of GBC positions. That same devotee would not do that now, but that was the mood then. Sannyasis received all the advantages while women generally got the worst accommodations, waited at the end of the food line, and prayed at the back of the temple. These changes took place in the mid-1970s. People who resisted were either silenced or forced out. Now, of course, she's generalizing. That means that it happened, not for everyone. By the time I joined, the controversy was settled. Women's place as second-class citizens was cemented and thoroughly institutionalized. She joined in 1978. So that's her experience, and I am not one to deny her experience. I can't say that's the universal experience of everyone. Obviously, it's subjective. But the point is that the way Prabhupada dealt with women did not seem to set a standard for everyone in the movement and all leadership across the board in the movement of how women should be dealt with. And so that's interesting. So what we see is, what we had spoken about last week, is that we had come out of a chauvinistic society, a male-dominated society, and so ISKCON became male-dominated not necessarily because that's the way it should be or should have been. It's the way that we were, and it naturally evolved that way. And now, not every temple was the same. These were not typical scenarios everywhere, but they did exist, and it did get bad. So now, in contrast, we see how Prabhupada dealt with women. And as we read, I think it was the first or second class, we read some quotes from the Manu Samhita, which talked about how women should be respected and honored and taken care of and protected. And if that is done, society will prosper, the family will prosper, everything will be auspicious. So we can see Prabhupada, as the cultured Vedic guru, was not demeaning women, but he was taking care of them. So we, as so-called Vedic sannyasis and so forth, weren't always doing exactly the same thing. So that's where we run into trouble. It's coming down, we see an example, but it filters through our mind and heart, and it comes out in a way in which it gets dirty through those filters. And men have a nature to be exploitive, especially of women, and especially when they're in positions of power, and especially when they're younger. Not always only younger, but especially, at least for devotees. It was more problematic when we were younger. So that's the introduction to today's class, and we're going to now continue reading from what Vishaka has written, and she's basically quoting Shastra and then quoting those excerpts which could be misunderstood, and then making comments, and then I'm making comments on those. So this is section 2. How did Prabhupada translate service opportunities for women? Prabhupada transplanted an entire culture from one age and milieu to a different age and milieu. Definitely. That is the, that's the real challenge we're dealing with, this transplanting of cultures. While he left the message of that culture intact, he also had to make the culture practical and appealing to young people who had no orientation to that culture, who had, for the most part, rejected the cultural values of their own society, and who had accustomed themselves to drugs and promiscuity. So, Prabhupada was preaching to hippies who had rejected their society. Now he's giving them a new society, a new set of cultural values. And then trying to figure out how to transplant that, how much to transplant, what to transplant, when to do it, at what stage of their evolution. It was definitely an experiment. And we learned by making many mistakes. And as I said, devotees are still making mistakes. A lot of the reason is they just don't have enough senior devotees around them to guide them. And so as young devotees on your own, in transplanting cultures, you tend to make, it's like planting someone here a plant in Florida that's never grown here before. And you don't talk to anyone who's done it. And so you don't realize that, you'll have to cover it in the winter, or it needs certain kind of fertilizer. It doesn't grow like it does in the tropics because it gets colder here in the winter. Something like that. Although shockingly contrary to the mood of the day, from the beginning, Srila Prabhupada encouraged his students to get married and be responsible. In other words, the hippies weren't getting married, generally. So it was going contrary to the whole culture that they lived in. Prabhupada's followers accepted his directives because they were convinced that by doing so, they could progress spiritually. Okay, so that sets the foundation. We were ready to give up our culture. We already had given it up mostly, and ready to adopt a new culture, which was very conservative. More conservative even than the culture we had given up. And we had given up a conservative culture, became very liberal, and now we're trying to adopt a culture that's more conservative than the culture that we had given up. Interesting, isn't it? So the next, this is a subtopic to this section, touching on touchy topics. Let's not shy away from the uncomfortable and controversial statements about women that we sometimes find in scriptural verses and in Srila Prabhupada's writing. For example, Srila Prabhupada writes, so now she's going to list all the controversial things, you can call it controversial, or unsettling statements that are unsettling for some women, or perhaps many women, or perhaps all Western women, or most of them, and then try to make sense out of it, so both men and women can understand the statements in context and what Prabhupada meant and what Shastra means. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to fasten your seatbelts. We are flying over some turbulent space. A man's psychology and woman's psychology are different. As constituted by bodily frame, a man always wants to be superior to his wife, and a woman, as bodily constituted, is naturally inferior to her husband. Thus, the natural instinct is that the husband wants to post himself as superior to the wife, and this must be observed. In other words, now a woman may say, but if a man is a devotee, then would he feel this way, or should he feel this way? And if he feels this way but misuses it, should I go along with it? This is where it becomes difficult. And what I've often said is that this is a study of male and female nature, and if you make an experiment in ideal circumstances, then the experiment comes out successful. If you make an experiment in circumstances which isn't ideal, then it doesn't come out successful. So Prabhupada's saying a man wants to be in control. That's his nature. Okay. Men, we know that. Women, you know that. That's natural psychology. So it's not a problem if the man is very sattvic, because in sattva guna, he's not selfish. He's not going to exploit his wife. So he'll use his desire to be in control to make things good for her, to protect her, and control the environment at home, to provide for her, and so forth. So when he does that, then it's very easy for the woman to say, yes, my husband likes to be controlled, he likes to be respected, and that when I respect him and give him control, I can see that he's very kind, he's very protective, and so forth. Draupadi was asked this question. How is it your husbands are so, it looks like they would do anything for you. It even looks like you control them. And she said, because I do everything for them, I'm always in a pleasing mood, I always respect them, I don't criticize their relatives, and so forth. So sometimes we say that in a marriage, if you fulfill the needs of your husband or you fulfill the needs of your wife, they will fulfill your needs, they will respond. If you're nice to them, they'll be nice to you. And then sometimes devotees will say, but I've done that, and they didn't. So that's an experiment in an environment that's not ideal. So when when Prabhupada makes these statements, a lot of times we think, a wife may think, oh, well, if I did that to my husband, he would make my life miserable. Or a man may think, well, if my wife was just submissive and did whatever I say, I'm not that strong. I might misuse that control. So I think the first thing to consider when you read these statements of Prabhupada is context. That we're dealing about men and women who are, quote-unquote, civilized, unlike many of us who came from Mleccha Yavana backgrounds, which we would be considered uncivilized. So, just like you have a guru, and you surrender to your guru, and you serve your guru, but does your guru exploit you? No. And why do you serve your guru? Because he serves you, because he helps you. It's a natural relationship. So sometimes husband and wife said to be like guru and disciple, but it's the same thing. What if your guru exploits you? What if your guru takes advantage of your submissiveness to exploit you for his sense gratification? Then obviously you will not be able to serve your guru, right? You will lose faith in him. It will make it difficult. How can I serve him? He's exploiting me. It's the same way with the husband. So men, if you want your wives to be follow what Prabhupada's saying in the purport, husband wants to post himself as superior. If you want to be superior and you want your wife to submit to you, then you really have to be an ideal husband. You really have to take care of her, and you really have to show her that when she submits to you, you use that to help her, to protect her, to fulfill her needs, to make her happy, and so forth. It's just like, let's say my wife gets an inheritance. And so she says, well, here's the money, please take care of it and utilize it. So then I go out and buy a Ferrari and things that I like that are not necessary. So that would be a misuse of her submissiveness. But I use the things to serve her. I know what she wants, I know what she needs, I know what we need as a family, I know her desires. And so then we use that money in the service of the family. So that's the idea. That if a husband is qualified, it's very easy for a woman to be submissive. Now, ladies, men like to be in control. It's their nature. It's not, you might say, is it their fault? Well, it's their nature. But as they advance in Krishna consciousness, will that nature get purified? Yes, it will become more of a serving nature. They will become more humble. They'll have less of a need to control. So when Prabhupada's talking about men like to be in a superior position and so forth, he's talking about men in general. So it is true that as women, as I was saying, that women may read this purport and they may think, okay, it says that man's nature is he wants to be in control, but they're devotees. And shouldn't the devotee be humble? And shouldn't a devotee, also a male devotee, shouldn't he listen and be submissive to his wife? And you would expect that. You would expect that. Ladies, at the same time, even though you would expect that, he's a man, and men do not like to be disrespected, especially by women. So that's always something to remember. And that's what Draupadi explained, that she basically had her husbands under control because she did whatever they wanted. So, of course, as I said, yes, these are ideal husbands, very easy to do whatever they want. So, men, if you want your wives to be more cooperative and more submissive, be a better example both as a devotee and as a husband, and utilize that power to help her, and then naturally makes it easy for her. So, this is what, we'll read now what Vishaka said. As I also mentioned in my introduction, men and women have different psychologies. Ignoring, defying, or trying to correct these natural psychological bents can make marital relationships ugly. Thus, such statements are helpful not just for the husband-wife relationships, but also for any relationship between men and women. For example, according to an article published in the New York Times on September 7th, 2017, Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, since 2005, has spent her political career playing down her gender, shunning a feminist label, offering modesty, caution, and diligent preparation as an implicit contrast to male swagger. In other words, she wasn't trying to be a man in her position as chancellor. She was doing that job as a woman. Honoring the male-female psychology, Merkel's leadership was often invisible because she painstakingly built consensus behind the scenes and avoided claiming credit for ideas she often originated. This is one way a woman can deal with the male psychological tendency to dominate women. In other words, what Vishaka is saying is, recognizing the male-female psychology, this chancellor worked in a way that didn't make the men feel that she was dominant and controlling, because they would have not been able to work well with her. So, understanding her, female psychology and male psychology, she worked within that. And so, Vishaka Devi is saying, you can't deny male-female psychology. And so you have to work within those parameters. And in any courses on married life that I've studied, they all say the same thing, that men, I don't want to say require. Okay, let's say require. Men require respect, but men are they're motivated by respect. It's very important for them. And for women, affection is more important than respect. Of course, affection is important for men, respect is important for women, but affection is more important for women and respect is more important for men. So, one of the worst things that anyone can do in a marriage or any relationship is to criticize. But it has a different effect on men than it does on women. Women might become more defensive when they're criticized and fight back. Or men, it will really be destructive on a core level for them, because respect is so important for them. So we can't deny these realities, and we have to honor them. And a lot of times in male-female relationships, you might see that a man needs respect, or you might see that a woman needs emotional support or affection. And in those situations, it may not make sense to you. So why would he need respect? He's good at what he does, and he did something well, but why would he need me to appreciate that? And now he's upset that I didn't appreciate him. I just saw what he did, and I said, oh, that's nice, thank you. But he expected much more, and I think, well, that's unreasonable. But what the woman has to understand is that maybe it's unreasonable, or it doesn't make sense from your perspective, but that's just his psychology. If we look at women, sometimes women are upset about things which are not upsetting to men. A man would never be upset about it. And the man's thinking, why are you upset about that? And the woman's thinking, I just need your support. I'm upset about it. And the man, it's so often hard to give support because he's thinking, but that's a stupid thing to be upset about. Nobody in the world would be upset about it. And you want me to support you? It's like so hard for me to find a place to support you because you're upset about something that no one would be upset about. So that's the trouble the men have in trying to support a woman. When she needs emotional support, he's thinking, but there's nothing wrong. When you're asking me to, it's like asking me to participate in a crime. But I'm going to admit, no, that's not a good example. You're asking me to admit that something's wrong, but there's nothing. I don't see anything wrong. You're asking me to support you because you're upset about something that you shouldn't be upset about. And so that's the challenge the men have in supporting the female psychology. The females, they need more support, more love. Often something bad happens to a man, he just deals with it. But bad happens to a woman, she falls apart. But when the man is not honored by his wife, or honored by women that he's dealing with, sometimes that can be devastating. It doesn't have to make sense to you, women, or men, it doesn't have to make sense to you. It's just working within the psychology. And so I think what Vishaka is saying also is that a lot of times when women are put in more male roles, then they think they have to take on more male qualities. Or if a man is put in more female roles, then he thinks he has to take on more female qualities. But that may be true to some degree, but there's also, I'm looking for tissues. Excuse me. But as she's pointing out, there's also female ways to operate within a male role and male ways to operate in a female role. So that's something to consider rather than women trying to become men, which is happening in society today in many ways. It's very unhealthy for women to try to become men. Extremely unhealthy. And as many women have observed, is that you already have your own nature and qualities, so why would you want to adopt another's nature and qualities? You already have your own. So use your own qualities. Then so maybe it's an environment where you have to be dominant leader, but then we have this beautiful example of this chancellor, Merkel. How she did it from the female point of view. I think that's a really important point. Thus it is possible for women to teach and lead men as the Nagnapatnis did with Kaliya and the Brahmins' wives did with their husbands. Let me see if I'm in the, yeah. How did they lead? They led by setting example. They led by praying. They led through their service. There's a book called lead without a title. And the premise of the book is that everyone is leading. Everyone is a leader of someone. So I think it's really it's unfortunate when women are forced to adopt male qualities in nature, especially against their will, when it's not even their nature, or vice versa. That's unfortunate. So then Prabhupada writes, this is a letter, the actual system is that the husband is spiritual master to his wife, but if the wife can bring her husband into practicing this process, then it is all right that the husband accepts wife as spiritual master. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has said that anyone who knows the science of Krishna, that person should be accepted as spiritual master, regardless of any material so-called qualifications, such as rich or poor, man or woman, or Brahmin or Shudra. So this is an example, it's a beautiful example of Prabhupada's, overarching or underlying principle, that the principle is what works to become Krishna conscious. So he has stated that the man wants to be in a superior position. It's natural for the woman to be in a superior position. It's their constitution, it's their nature. And here he's saying, but if the woman is more advanced, then it would be more advantageous for her to be a spiritual guide to the husband. Maybe materially he would be a guide to her, but spiritually she would be a guide to him. And so what does Prabhupada say? It is all right if the husband accepts the wife as spiritual master, if she can bring him to Krishna consciousness. I think perhaps Prabhupada was referring to a woman becoming a devotee, but her husband reluctant, and she can bring him, she becomes a spiritual master, where it technically should work the other way, that the husband comes, the husband's more intelligent, men are more advanced, theoretically, but often we see it's the other way around, that the wife is more advanced, more Krishna conscious. So she becomes the leader spiritually in the family. She becomes a devotee, he doesn't become a devotee, and now she becomes a spiritual master. So Prabhupada is willing here to change roles. Now, as I was reading this, I was thinking, okay, now Prabhupada is saying in the next line, any person can become a guru. Anyone can become a guru. It doesn't matter. So then he's giving some shastric justification. So yeah, your wife can be your guru if she's more qualified. So now, as I was reading this, I was thinking, how will a female be a guru as opposed to a male? Will it be different? Yes, it will be different. Why will it be different? Because she's a female. And so how a female does things will be a little different than a male. Of course, we don't have examples in ISKCON of initiating gurus who are women. We have Siksha gurus. And of course, woman by nature is mother. So naturally, the female guru is going to be more motherly, or she'll do it in different ways. So, again, ladies, you don't have to become men to perform functions that typically were male. Stay as a woman, and from that position of power, do it. We already have men doing it as men, so we don't necessarily need women to do it as men. Perhaps you might say, well, some men find that trait attractive when women are very male. I don't think in ISKCON it's considered so attractive. It's considered maybe attractive from a managerial position because they can manage, but if they do it as women, everyone will appreciate them. If they do it like men, they won't. I have personal experience. I have personal experience of both of these. Women managing fantastically as women, and I never ever heard anybody say anything bad about this woman. And I have experience of a woman managing like a man, and I've heard so many men just like write her off, like I can't deal with her. because it's like they're dealing with a heavy man. And, and sometimes if a woman takes on a male role, she can even be heavier than a man. So this was the experience of many men. This is my personal experience. It's not I don't see it as a criticism. It's just an observation. And both these devotees are wonderful. And that's all. I just want to say it's not working so well for the woman who's more male, and it's working very well for the woman who maintains, she has a male nature because she's a fantastic manager, make things happen if you call that male nature. But she does it from the woman's position. Everyone likes her. Another possible touchy statement from Srila Prabhupada's writings. This is from Madhya Lila 7, 128 purport. Every person must get married. Every woman especially must get married. Okay, everyone. That's an order. Too bad, brahmacharis. You just read that. Actually, there's another purport from Prabhupada says, all the women should get married and all the men should remain single. Well, if that's true, then every man's going to have to marry. Whatever men end up getting married, you're going to have to marry a lot of women. So, Vishaka says, this and other such statements are generalizations or guidelines meant to give us informed direction. Generalizations, by definition, are inferred from specific cases and not meant to be applied indiscriminately, whereas universal statements, such as that we're spirit soul, are always true in every circumstance. So what she's saying is that when we read such statements like this, which are generalizations, if we take them as universal statements, it breeds fanaticism. Oh, as Prabhupada said, everyone should get married, so now we've just bought white dhotis for all the brahmacharis, and we're looking for husbands for all the women, and we hope to get them all married within a month. And in the future, by the age of 13, they should all get married. So, these, when Prabhupada makes these statements, and there's discussion with him, and they say, but Srila Prabhupada, some women don't want to get married. He said, okay, they can remain brahmacharis, brahmacharinis, and like in the convent, you have nuns, we can do that. So Prabhupada was always willing to adapt to what worked best for individuals. So rather than force an individual to do something that's unnatural, he would make adjustment. Now we see that also in marriage, that Prabhupada did not force his disciples in traditional roles of husband and female, male and female, boy, husband and wife. Yeah. I got up early. So when it wasn't working, he didn't force them into those positions when it wasn't working. That's the point. He would say, in general, this is the position of husband. In general, this is the position of wife. But if you try to adopt those general positions and they don't work, then what's the point? Now, maybe you don't know how to work them, maybe something's wrong with you, and maybe you don't know how to live those roles. There could be so many considerations. And that's true. We may understand the role model of the ideal husband or wife, and we don't fit into it. And we admit that. He said, I just don't fit into it. So then we make adjustments so it works, so the relationship works well, and we're happy. Okay. I have to close the door because the door is swinging open and closed. This will only take 5 seconds, and it's squeaking. I don't know if you hear that squeaking, like we're in a barn somewhere. But because I'm recording this is also being recorded. People will listen to it again, have to listen to this. So, bear with me one moment. Well, 5 moments. Maybe 7 moments. I opened that door because, as you can see, there's light coming from there. But Now, some people, I'll just put it here. Some people will argue that, these roles in Vedic society are perfect, and we create all kinds of problems when we're not able to follow those roles. And that's an argument that has validity, except when you can't follow those roles. Okay, so because we're not following these roles of husband and wife and traditional roles of male and female, we have problems. But the other problem is we weren't trained to follow them, and many of us cannot. And the other problem is that in modern society, we may not be able to function well following traditional roles in every situation. So that's where we run into the problem, and that's the problem of generalization. They're not universal truths, and that's where we run into problems in ISKCON, in trying to enforce specific gender roles that don't work, that cause problems. So like you're in a marriage and you're trying to enforce gender roles of husband and wife, which are good, which are shastric, and which should be done. But the wife just can't do it, or the husband just can't do it. It's not her nature. And if the other spouse enforces it upon them, says, no, you must be this way, all our problems are because you're not like this, then it creates a very disturbing relationship. And so in the name of being Vedic, we end up divorced. Of course, divorce is not really Vedic, although there's some conditions where it's allowed. But in the name of being Krishna conscious, we get divorced. That doesn't make sense, does it? Prabhu, why did you get divorced? We were so Krishna conscious. We were so strict about following the ideals that we drove one another crazy. And before we ended up killing ourselves or killing one another, then we decided we should get divorced. So, of course, we're just joking and exaggerating, but it's something like that. It does happen like that. Okay. It's 9 o'clock. We've gone an hour. Well, there's so much more to read. Let me just continue just for a moment to finish the train of thought. I'm trying to see what she says. For example, although Srila Prabhupada said everyone, and especially all women, should be married, he also said, if one can remain without marriage, that is the first class. Women also? Women also. What is the use of this material husband? Make Krishna husband. Krishna is prepared to become everything. Love him as husband. Love him as son. Love him as friend. So, Prabhupada's going from a general social structure, and then he's going into a higher principle. Well, in Krishna consciousness, if you can remain single, that's better. Make Krishna your husband. So it's a general principle for society in general and ordinary people. But if you can be extraordinary and make Krishna your husband, why not? So that's interesting, isn't it? Now the question is, well, how do you apply Krishna consciousness in a way that Prabhupada's doing it? Because it appears here that Prabhupada is saying, okay, what I just said, you don't really have to follow. If you want to be Krishna conscious, you can remain single. So I think it underscores the point that what you do to make you Krishna conscious is always the most important thing. You don't want to die not being Krishna conscious, being very Vedic. Of course, someone could argue, what if you're Vedic, you'll be Krishna conscious? Not necessarily. You might just be Vedic or Sattvic. Very accomplished at following rules and regulations, being socially proper and so forth. So, I have some questions. I have to go back to the beginning. I don't think we had any questions in the beginning, but just to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Okay. Just now coming. Okay, first question. Men tend to have a problem with admitting that they made a mistake. how to tell the man that he did something wrong, not destroying relationship and not make him feel not respected. You don't, we've talked about this a bit before. When he does something wrong, you can present it in terms of your needs rather than putting him down. You know, if instead of doing this, you could do that, that would really help me. That would inspire me. Or if you could do this instead of that, then I would, you know, I have a need. I have a need for this, and if you could do this, and when you do that, it's, you know, it's my problem. It upsets me. It disturbs me, or I feel this way. You know, so you're not putting him down, but you're saying it's become a problem for you. So, you know, maybe it's just me, but I need you to do this, or I need a husband who does this more than does that. Something like that. So you want to avoid attacking. I mean, it's good advice for the wife as well, or the husband as well. But especially you want to avoid attacking, putting someone down, criticizing, blaming them. So, when you have a problem with your husband or wife, try to think how you could discuss the problem in a way without making them feel that you're blaming them or putting them down. And usually that's done in relation to explaining your needs. So let's say my wife doesn't cook meals on time. Then I could say to her, what's wrong with you? You know, you're not even working, and still you're hardly working, and still you're not cooking meals on time. You know, like you lazy or something, or what's wrong? I don't understand. That's one way. Or another way of saying is, I have a need. My body I need every night by 6. I need to eat something. That's because I don't want to eat after 6, and I get hungry at that time. And if I don't eat, then I get shaky and weak, and I can't function. Would it be possible that you could have dinner ready at 6? So you're accomplishing the same thing, but you're expressing it from your perspective rather than putting her down. Or men or women doing the same thing for men. So in every situation where you need to rectify some situation where you're tempted to shame or criticize your spouse, think of how to say it in a way that they won't feel shamed or criticized, but it's more about what you need. There is a man named Dr. John Gottman, and he studied couples for 40 years, and by studying couples and following them and following the divorce rate, he was able to calculate what will cause divorce. And not only, he'd study couples and he would say, it was about 90% accurate. Maybe today even more accurate. He was 90% accurate by seeing certain symptoms in the marriage. And also he was accurate in determining when the divorce would happen, like how long they could go on that way, depending on the intensity. And so he said criticism and blame are strong indicators of a marriage that is not going to last. And the reason he said was that in a marriage you have to have 5 times more positive interactions than negative interactions. And so criticism and blame, putting down and so forth, is a very negative interaction. So if those interactions are too frequent, then you lose the 5-to-1 ratio. And when you lose the 5-to-1 ratio, then the marriage is on its way out. And criticism and blame have lots of potency in creating negativity. So I think that's important to consider. Krishna Karshani says, I know gurus who, if both spouses are his disciples, they don't give a woman initiation if a man is not initiated, because they don't want a man to feel inferior. They're giving initiation when they are Both. Really interesting. Yeah. Of course, a lot of men would encourage their wives to get initiated. They would be happy. But in cases where they feel it could be a problem, yes. And there are, men are different. Not every man needs to feel superior, super superior, and not every man would be unhappy if his wife were initiated. A lot would be happy and happy to serve. But I think the point is that you're dealing with a particular situation. And so in dealing with a particular situation, you take into consideration the reality of these two individuals rather than generalize statements or purports that may make it difficult to follow for those people. And that's a huge problem that our movement has had. Taking something, generalizing it, trying to apply it to everyone in every situation where it's not necessary to do that in the name of being Vedic or being chaste to our philosophy. And, obviously we want to apply things that way as far as possible. But it may not always be possible. So, is that okay? Now, okay, I'm just going to continue reading a little more because it's the same topic. And then if you have no more questions, we'll end. So, Prabhupada's, we're going from this purport where Prabhupada's saying everyone should get married, and another purport where all the women should get married, and all the men should remain brahmachari, to now conversations with Prabhupada and seeing what he's saying. If one becomes Krishna conscious, then she doesn't require husband. She does not require. She knows that Krishna is my protector. Why shall I artificially seek after father or... I think Prabhupada means husband. He didn't say it. And what protection for a few days either the father or the son or the husband may give. Real protection is Krishna. So we go back to what Prabhupada said in the CC. Every person must get married. Every woman especially must get married. So it's clear that Prabhupada is speaking in general. People in general, every woman should be married. That's best. They need protection. And then Prabhupada's talking about women devotees who may be more advanced, transcendental. We have god sisters that are very transcendental, never got married, are still Krishna conscious. So then Prabhupada's applying a general principle, which is, you could say Vedic or even just traditional. Traditionally, it's good that women are married because they'll be well taken care of and protected materially and also spiritually, generally. But here Prabhupada's saying, well, there's another principle. What's that principle? Krishna consciousness, and Krishna consciousness is transcendental. So in some cases, the other principle may not be necessary, may not apply. Now, at the same time, we shouldn't think that I'm transcendental when I'm not, because then you try to apply this principle and it doesn't work. Okay, I'll make Krishna my husband, and then when you're 50 years old, you're regretting you don't have children and you never got married. So you want to avoid that as well. But so these are both principles. And so she goes on to say, we have a number of practical examples in our movement of women who are not protected by father, husband, or son, Malati, Mukya, Kaishori, Prashanta, Vishakapriya, to name a few. Each of these women not only feel protected, but are also making important contributions to Srila Prabhupada's movement. So why do they feel protected? For for the same reason we feel protected, by sadhu sangha, by our shastras, by the holy name, by our temples, and so forth. We should note with caution, however, that neither men nor women are meant to remain single artificially, that is, to remain single for prestige, power, or out of frustration. This benefits no one and leaves the individuals involved unhappy and vulnerable. It's interesting how I make comments and then she says the same thing, or I said the same thing she said. The above quotes are easy to understand. Let's look at some more challenging statements. Generally, all women desire material enjoyment. They are called less intelligent, because they are mostly prone to material enjoyment. This is from the Srimad Bhagavatam 3:23-54. These are the kind of verses back in the 70s and 80s that renounced men would really, how should we say it, would speak about verses like this in a way which, if we look at today, might make us vomit, might make us want to feel embarrassed that we were part of such a movement, that women would be so denigrated by such statements. Prabhupada, both of them are very intelligent. Prabhupada's talking about Nandarani and her husband, Dayananda. They're very old disciples of Prabhupada. Both of them are very intelligent, and Nandarani is more intelligent than her husband. Prabhupada laughs. I know that. Treya Rishi, I find that he is very intelligent, Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada, Dayananda. Treya Rishi, yes. Prabhupada, he is intelligent, but Nandarani is still more intelligent. Prabhupada laughs. I know that. Both of them are intelligent. But this girl appears to be more intelligent. So, we had just read women. So let's go back to what the purport. Generally, all women desire material enjoyment. They are called less intelligent because they're mostly prone to material enjoyment. Of course, now I think what's obvious is that when a woman becomes devotee, at least in relation to women in general, she's much less prone to material enjoyment than women in general. And one definition of intelligence is that you're detached from material enjoyment. One definition of being foolish is you're attached to material enjoyment. So once I looked up less intelligent in Prabhupada's books, and predominantly it was you don't accept Krishna or you're attached to material enjoyment. That makes you less intelligent. So if women are more attached to material enjoyment, if they're more sensual by nature, then it follows by that definition they're less intelligent. Not that they can't be doctors and lawyers and run companies. But by definition, if less intelligent means, as Shastra says, that you're less sense-controlled, yes, then they're less intelligent. But when they become devotees, and obviously there are non-devotees women who are more sense-controlled than devotee women, believe it or not. Like I was told Madonna, was a very sensual figure and very materialistic and so forth, but was extremely disciplined. We know somebody who was teaching her yoga, and she said it was amazingly disciplined, and that's part of her persona, how she became successful. So, does it mean women can't be disciplined and control their senses? Well, you might say she controlled her senses for a materialistic purpose. Okay. Which is what everyone does in the material world. But the point is, again, a generalization. But specifically, Prabhupada is speaking about a devotee, and Prabhupada never generally spoke about his disciples as less intelligent. There's another example where Prabhupada mentioned less intelligent or defined it when a woman exploits a woman sexually in the name of woman's liberation, and she allows that to happen and consequently becomes pregnant and has to have an abortion or has to go on welfare. And allowing men to do that to her, Prabhupada said, that's less intelligent, not understanding how she's being exploited. So that's another definition of less intelligent, but you can apply that to men. If you allow anyone to exploit you, you're less intelligent. But it seems to be a lot easier for men to exploit women than women to exploit men, for many, many reasons. Men definitely want to be exploited by women sexually. They love it. But it's different for women. So when women would ask Prabhupada, are we less intelligent? He said, no, you're devotees. You're most intelligent. And so that's, in our Shastra, the definition of intelligence. You control yourself. You accept Krishna. That's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You surrender to Him. So let's read what she says. This is, of course, one of the most perhaps controversial things that our Shastra says, but it's from Manu Samhita, and Prabhupada's just quoting Manu Samhita. And Prabhupada's using, Madhu Samhita uses it in the context of protecting women. As we talked about, I think, in the first class, if we say women are less intelligent, number one, we have to define what that means. And number two, once we define it, it involves, the conclusion is that women need to be protected because they have the tendency for material enjoyment. So the men are supposed to be sattvic and protect them. So the conclusion is not to exploit them, but to protect them. And we make this wrong conclusion. If they're weaker and less intelligent, then I get to exploit them. That's not the context of this. No, you get to take care of them. If you are stronger and you are more intelligent, then you should take care of them and not exploit them and not tell them they're stupid. Don't ever tell anybody they're stupid. It's the worst thing you can tell them. Unless they did something stupid, say, what you just did, I just have to tell you, that wasn't intelligent. Okay, one-off, once a year, twice a year, yeah, but every day, no. So Vishaka goes on to say, to understand the women are less intelligent statement, we need to consider what intelligence means in this or other context. In Sanskrit, there are several words that are translated as intelligence. One is buddhi, which refers to the ability to analyze, judge, or discern. Another is medha. In the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna lists medha among 7 feminine qualities. Medha means mental vigor, wisdom, prudence. From Prabhupada's purport to Bhagavad Gita 10:34, quote, the ability not only to read many books on different subject matters, but to understand them and apply them when necessary is intelligence, medha, another opulence. Thus, these are broad classifications: buddhi, analytical intelligence; medha, nourishing practical intelligence. Yeah, you can see women are scholars, teachers. So here's a purport. The Lord is so kind that he does not show special favor only to one who is a great philosopher. He knows the sincerity of purpose. For this reason only, women generally assemble in great numbers in any sort of religious function. In every country and in every sect of religion, it appears that women are more interested than the men. However, both men and women have both the buddhi and medha types of intelligence. It's a matter of degrees. We need to avoid jumping to conclusions about a person or group of people based on what body they're wearing around their intelligence. Just like sometimes someone will come to the temple, or you'll meet someone when you're doing Sankirtan, you will meet a woman, a young woman, an older woman, and you'll talk to them, and they're very open to Krishna consciousness. This happened to me when I was in Australia. I met a young woman. And we spent a little time with her boyfriend together. I knew her boyfriend, and we spent a little time. And periodically, she was just coming to Krishna consciousness, and periodically I would tell her, I would say, you know, you're a devotee. You're just going to become a devotee. You already think like a devotee. You already understand like a devotee. So you meet these people who basically, by the time they meet devotees, they already think like devotees. They already understand what's in Bhagavad Gita, and they never even read it, right? And then we think in our mind, well, this woman, she's really intelligent. She understands all these things. Isn't it? We all have this experience. I mean, I'm talking to men now. You have this experience. This woman is intelligent. She understands. So there is intelligence in the head. They understand. Now, practically, generally, women tend to be more attracted materially to material things. They like material things a lot. Beautiful clothes, beautiful ornaments, beautiful home, and so forth. Generally, they like it more than men. Can't say men don't like it. So that's a reality. We understand that. So that's an aspect of less intelligent. But as we were saying, as devotees, comparatively, when they become devotees, they become much more detached. When I met my wife-to-be, and whenever it was, 1992, and I went to speak to her where she was staying, all she had was one trunk, metal trunk, about a yard wide, a meter wide, and about this high, 2 feet high. and a sleeping bag. That's all she owned. So that was pretty renounced. I'm sure she owned more than that before she was a devotee, but she was living as a brahmacharini. And so, and now you want to see how big the metal trunk has become. It has become as big as a whole house. Amazing, right? You can put a lot more in a house than a metal trunk. But still, we spend so much time in India and it's austere, and we give up the house here and all the comforts. And she goes on parikrama because she's a devotee. Walks barefoot, does austerity because she's a devotee. So that's intelligent, right? So that's how we understand. So I think we can end here, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, 8 o'clock, and then we'll continue reading this. There are some things that are a little controversial that I've refrained from saying. But on my daily quotes, I think I'll speak about them just a little bit. I'm starting to speak on my daily quotes just spontaneously, without a quote, because there's so many issues on my mind, because these issues come to me from devotees writing me with problems and observations. And so I just started speaking very frankly about things that I think are important to speak about. And I just read something this morning. It was really interesting. The Hare Krishna movement had a paper called the ISKCON World Review, which was to report about events within ISKCON, and also initially it was to discuss controversies and things that need to be discussed. Isn't that interesting? And later on it just became more of a PR, just mention all the good, don't mention the bad, and then they had a big meeting, and then they decided, no, we have to discuss reality. So I think it's important to discuss what's real, because it's on everyone's mind, and to understand our history, although it's not always beautiful, it's important. We have to learn from it. And a lot of you are not aware of the history. And so if I discuss it here, I would be discussing it at maybe lengths that aren't necessary. So in my daily quotes, I've been discussing some real issues, and you'll start to hear the real issues, I think, on July 28th they start coming out, or 27th. Yes. So you'll see that there's no quote. I just begin talking. So those days when there's no quote and I just begin talking, we're talking about things that are relevant. And I started doing this, and after I started doing this, a devotee told me that a lot of people who are very popular on YouTube, that's what they do. They just talk about what's going on in their life, because what's going on in their life is generally relevant to other people. So they talk about it. And it becomes very interesting because it's so real. And so I was already doing that, and then they mentioned that, and I thought, well, that's interesting that you mentioned it, because I also thought of doing the same thing, because there's so many things that are on my mind because of just what I deal with personally and what other devotees are dealing with that I'm helping. And I thought, well, I think this will really be important to discuss. So these videos are not very philosophical, and they're not meant to be. They're meant to be dealing with issues that affect a lot of us, the things that we're going through and things that are on our minds, that we think about, and maybe we can't resolve, or maybe there are opinions on both sides of an issue, and it's really difficult to understand why there are two opinions, or why one side would even have that opinion. And so I discuss those things. And we'll see how that goes. We'll see what the response is. But just as a heads up, starting on July 27th, those videos will be out, the daily videos. And as long as I have things on my mind to discuss, I will do those videos. Or if those videos get good response, people appreciate it, they feel they're extremely relevant, then we can continue the daily videos that way, as discussions on issues that are relevant. Okay, so we'll see you tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we'll continue this discussion about these quote-unquote controversial or misunderstood statements about women made by Srila Prabhupada. And as I said, and this is the third time I'm saying this, these statements are equally, if not more important for men to hear, because it's the men who have the potential to perpetrate any kind of discrimination against women and have the potential to stand up against any kind of discrimination against women in ISKCON. So we want to make ISKCON the movement that every woman would want to be part of, and every woman feels appreciated and respected when they join. Okay, Hare Krishna, we'll see you tomorrow.